The train lurched to a stop at Montrose Station in western Colorado, and Lucy Reinhardt pressed her gloved hand against the window, staring at the dusty platform where three men stood waiting, each holding a crumpled piece of paper that she knew contained her photograph and details. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston to become a bride to whomever would have her, leaving behind a life of poverty and desperation after her parents died of influenza, and left her with nothing but debts she could never repay. The year was 1882, and she was 22 years old with auburn hair that refused to stay pinned properly, green eyes that watered in bright sunlight, and a limp from a childhood accident that made her right leg shorter than her left by nearly an inch. She watched the three men scan each departing passenger, their expressions growing more anxious as the crowd thinned, and she knew the moment they spotted her because their faces changed from anticipation to something that made her stomach drop. The first man was a banker named Gerald Morrison, tall and well-dressed with a pocket watch chain gleaming across his vest. He approached her cautiously, his eyes moving from her face down to where her skirts hid her uneven gait, though she knew he could see it in the way she shifted her weight. "Miss Reinhardt?" he asked, his voice already carrying disappointment. "Yes, sir," Lucy replied, keeping her chin up despite the heat creeping into her cheeks. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance." Gerald glanced back at the other two men, then down at the photograph in his hand. "This picture must be several years old," he said, not unkindly but not gently either. "And you did not mention in your letters about your condition." "My condition," Lucy repeated, though she knew exactly what he meant. "I walk perfectly well, sir. It has never prevented me from performing any task required of a wife." "I am sure that is true," Gerald said, already backing away, "but I am afraid there has been a misunderstanding. I require a wife who can keep up with the social demands of my position. The banker's wife must host parties, attend functions, and I simply cannot have someone who cannot even walk properly beside me. I am sorry, Miss Reinhardt, but this will not work." He turned and left before she could respond, his boots clicking against the wooden platform as he disappeared into the crowd. Lucy stood there with her single trunk beside her, watching him go while the other two men approached. She recognized them from their descriptions in the correspondence. One was a cattle rancher named Vernon Hughes, broad-shouldered and weathered, about 40 years old. The other was a shopkeeper named Albert Fisher, younger and softer around the middle with nervous hands that kept adjusting his hat. Vernon spoke first. "Miss Reinhardt, I am Vernon Hughes. We have been writing these past 3 months." "Yes, Mr. Hughes," Lucy said, extending her hand. He shook it briefly, his calloused palm rough against her gloved fingers. "I am very glad to finally meet you in person." "You are a pretty enough girl," Vernon said, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "But I notice you are favoring your right side. What is wrong with your leg?" Lucy had explained this in her letters, or at least she thought she had. Perhaps he had not read them carefully, or perhaps she had been too subtle in her description. "When I was 7 years old, I fell from a hayloft. My leg healed incorrectly. It is shorter than the left, but it does not pain me, and I can work as hard as any woman." Vernon shook his head slowly. "I need a wife who can help with the ranch. The work is hard, Miss Reinhardt. I need someone who can ride for hours, help move cattle, carry heavy loads. I do not doubt your character, but I cannot take the risk. I am sorry you came all this way, but this will not suit." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her with Albert, who looked even more uncomfortable than before. Lucy turned to him with waning hope, already seeing the answer in his eyes. "Mr. Fisher," she prompted. "I am terribly sorry," Albert stammered, his face red. "But you see, I have a reputation to maintain in town. My customers expect certain things. If I were to marry someone who is not quite right, it might affect my business. People talk, you understand. I am sure you are a fine woman, but I simply cannot afford to take such a risk. Perhaps you could find work in town, as a seamstress or something. I truly am sorry." He hurried away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone on the platform with her trunk and the growing realization that she had nowhere to go. The train that brought her was already pulling away, heading further west. She had exactly $3.20 in her purse, barely enough for a week at a boarding house if she could find one that would take her. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath her traveling dress. Around her, the platform emptied until she was the only person left except for the station master, who was eyeing her with obvious curiosity. Lucy picked up her trunk, staggering slightly under its weight, and began walking toward what looked like the main street of Montrose. Her leg ached from the long train journey, and carrying the heavy trunk made her gait even more pronounced. She could feel people staring as she made her way down the dusty road, past the general store and the saloon and the sheriff's office. A group of women in bonnets stopped talking to watch her pass, their expressions a mixture of pity and disdain. Children playing in the street pointed and giggled until their mothers hushed them. She finally found a small boarding house at the end of the main street, run by a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Patterson, who agreed to rent her a room for $2 a week, payable in advance. The room was tiny, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it had a window that let in the afternoon light, and it was clean. Lucy sat on the bed after Mrs. Patterson left, still wearing her traveling dress, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to feel sorry for herself. Then she stood up, unpacked her trunk, and went downstairs to ask Mrs. Patterson if she knew anyone who needed a seamstress or a cook or a housekeeper. "You are that mail-order bride who got rejected by 3 men today," Mrs. Patterson said bluntly, sizing Lucy up with sharp eyes. "Word travels fast in a small town." "Yes, madam, I am," Lucy replied, refusing to show embarrassment. "But I still need to earn my living. I can sew, cook, clean, do laundry, tend gardens, and keep accounts. I am a hard worker despite my leg, and I learn quickly." Mrs. Patterson softened slightly. "The school teacher might need help. Her name is Miss Davies, and she lives above the schoolhouse on 3rd Street. She has been looking for someone to help with the younger children. The pay would not be much, but it would be something." "Thank you," Lucy said gratefully. "I will go see her tomorrow morning." That night, Lucy lay in her narrow bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the Colorado town. Dogs barking, horses whinnying, men laughing and shouting from the saloon down the street, and somewhere far off, the lonesome call of a coyote. She thought about her parents buried in Boston, about the life she had left behind, about the future she had imagined with a husband and a home of her own. Instead, she was alone in a strange town where everyone already knew she had been rejected not once but 3 times in a single afternoon. She refused to cry, though. Crying would not change anything, and she had already cried enough tears when her parents died. The next morning, Lucy put on her best day dress, a modest green cotton that brought out her eyes, and made her way to the schoolhouse. The building was small and whitewashed, sitting on a patch of land at the edge of town. She could hear children's voices reciting multiplication tables as she approached, and when she knocked on the door, a young woman answered with chalk dust on her hands and a harried expression on her face. "Miss Davies?" Lucy asked. "My name is Lucy Reinhardt. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house suggested I speak with you about possibly helping with the children." Miss Davies looked her up and down, taking in the limp immediately but saying nothing about it. "You are the mail-order bride from yesterday," she said, not unkindly. "I heard what happened. Those men are fools if you ask me. Can you read and write well?" "Yes, madam. I completed 8 years of school back in Boston, and I have read extensively on my own since then." "Can you handle young children? Some of them are quite wild." "I helped raise my younger cousins before they were sent to live with relatives after my parents died. I am patient and I do not frighten easily." Miss Davies smiled for the first time. "You are hired. I can pay you $4 a week to help me with the younger students, teaching them their letters and numbers. The hours are 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. When can you start?" "Right now, if you need me." Miss Davies laughed and opened the door wider. "Come in, then. Let me introduce you to the children." The next 3 weeks passed quickly as Lucy settled into her new routine. She helped Miss Davies with 15 children ranging from 5 to 8 years old, teaching them to read and write and do simple arithmetic. The work was exhausting but satisfying, and the children did not seem to care about her limp. They called her Miss Lucy and brought her wildflowers and asked her to tell them stories about Boston, which sounded as exotic to them as Paris might have sounded to her. In the evenings, she returned to the boarding house and took on sewing work to supplement her income. She repaired torn shirts for the ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouses outside town, hemmed dresses for the respectable ladies who would not speak to her directly but were happy enough to use her services, and even made a christening gown for the banker's wife, though Gerald Morrison never acknowledged her when he passed her on the street. She saw the 3 men who had rejected her around town occasionally. Vernon Hughes came into town every Saturday for supplies, and he always looked away when he saw her, as if embarrassed. Albert Fisher crossed the street to avoid passing too close to her, which she found more amusing than insulting. Gerald Morrison simply ignored her existence entirely, which suited her fine. What she did not expect was the attention from other quarters. Several single men in town heard about the rejected mail-order bride and decided to try their luck, showing up at the boarding house or waiting outside the schoolhouse. They were mostly ranch hands or miners, rough men with whiskey on their breath and crude propositions that had nothing to do with marriage. Lucy learned to carry a hat pin and to walk quickly, and after she stabbed one particularly persistent cowboy in the hand when he grabbed her arm, the others left her alone. It was on a Saturday morning in late September when everything changed. Lucy had finished her shopping at the general store and was struggling to carry her parcels back to the boarding house when she stumbled on a raised board in the sidewalk. She went down hard, her packages scattering across the street, her bad leg folding under her awkwardly. She heard laughter from somewhere behind her, probably from the men lounging outside the saloon, and she felt her face burn with humiliation as she tried to gather her things while still sitting in the dust. Then a shadow fell across her, and a deep voice said, "Here, let me help you with that." Lucy looked up into the face of a man she had never seen before, though that was not particularly unusual in Montrose, which saw plenty of drifters and cowboys passing through. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and brown eyes that looked at her with genuine concern rather than pity or amusement. He wore dusty work clothes, well-worn boots, and a gun belt that sat comfortably on his hips like he knew how to use it. "Thank you," Lucy said, accepting the hand he offered to help her up. His grip was strong and steady, and he waited patiently while she found her balance before releasing her. "I am usually more careful." "That board has been loose for months," the man said, beginning to gather her scattered packages. "The town council keeps meaning to fix it, but they never get around to it. Are you hurt?" "No, just my pride," Lucy admitted, brushing dust from her skirts. She studied him more carefully now that she was standing. He had a kind face, weather worn but honest, with smile lines around his eyes and a scar across his left eyebrow. "I do not believe we have met. I am Lucy Reinhardt." "Daniel Zimmerman," he replied, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Most folks call me Danny. I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles outside town. I have been there since spring, so I am still fairly new myself." "I have been here about a month," Lucy said, taking the packages he handed her. "I came from Boston to marry one of the gentlemen here, but that did not work out as planned." She had no idea why she told him that, especially so bluntly, but something about his easy manner made her feel comfortable. He did not react with surprise or judgment, just nodded slowly. "I heard about that," Danny said. "The rejected mail-order bride. Folks in the bunkhouse talked about it. They said 3 different men turned you down in one day." "That is correct," Lucy replied, lifting her chin. "Apparently, I am not suitable for polite society due to my leg." Danny glanced down at her leg, then back to her face. "Your leg seems to work fine to me. You are standing on it right now. It is shorter than the other one. I limp when I walk. So, my friend Pete back at the ranch is missing 2 fingers from a roping accident. Does not make him any less good at his job. My boss, Mr. Rowland, has a bum knee that aches before it rains. Still runs the best cattle operation in the county." He paused, then added, "If you do not mind me saying so, those 3 men were damned fools." Lucy felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something she had not felt since arriving in Montrose. "That is kind of you to say, Mr. Zimmerman." "Danny," he corrected. "And I am not being kind, I am being honest. Here, let me carry these packages for you. Where are you headed?" "The boarding house at the end of Main Street, but you do not have to trouble yourself." "No trouble at all. I was just heading that way anyhow." That was clearly a lie, since the boarding house was in the opposite direction from everything else, but Lucy did not argue. They walked together down the street, and she was acutely aware of people watching them, probably already spreading gossip about the rejected bride walking with some cowboy. Danny kept his stride slow to match her pace, never hurrying her or showing impatience, and he talked easily about inconsequential things such as the weather and the upcoming harvest and an ornery bull that had escaped its pen 3 times in 1 week. When they reached the boarding house, he carried her packages all the way to her room despite Mrs. Patterson's disapproving stare, setting them carefully on her small table. "Thank you again," Lucy said, suddenly feeling shy now that they were alone in her tiny room. "You have been very kind." "It was my pleasure, Miss Reinhardt," Danny said, and she could tell he meant it. He hesitated at the door, turning his hat in his hands. "I was wondering if maybe you might like to have dinner with me sometime. There is a decent restaurant next to the hotel. Nothing fancy, but the food is good." Lucy's heart skipped. "Are you asking to court me, Mr. Zimmerman, Danny?" he said again, smiling. "And yes, I suppose I am. If you are interested, that is. No pressure if you are not." She should probably say no. She had been in town less than 2 months, and she was still recovering from the humiliation of being rejected 3 times. She barely knew this man. He was a cowboy who probably earned $30 a month and owned nothing but his horse and his saddle. But when she looked at his open, honest face, she found herself smiling back. "I would like that very much, Danny." His face lit up. "How about tomorrow evening? I can pick you up at 6 o'clock if that suits you." 6 o'clock would be perfect. After he left, Lucy sat on her bed and tried to calm her racing heart. She told herself not to get her hopes up, that this was just dinner, that it probably would not lead to anything. But she could not help remembering the way he had looked at her, not at her leg or her limp, but at her face, meeting her eyes directly like she was a person worth seeing. The next evening, Danny arrived exactly at 6 o'clock, freshly washed and wearing what were obviously his best clothes, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers that he must have picked himself. Lucy had worn her nicest dress, a blue cotton with white trim that she had sewn herself, and she had spent an hour pinning her unruly hair into something resembling a respectable style. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and candles on each table. The owner, a friendly Italian man named Mr. Rossini, seated them near the window and brought them water in tin cups. Lucy ordered roasted chicken and Danny ordered steak, and they talked while they waited for their food. "Tell me about Boston," Danny said, leaning forward with genuine interest. "I have never been further east than Kansas." So Lucy told him about the city, about the cobblestone streets and the tall buildings, and the harbor with its ships from all over the world. She told him about her parents, her father who had been a clerk and her mother who had taken in laundry, about how they had died within days of each other during the influenza outbreak and left her with nothing but debts and memories. "That must have been terrible," Danny said quietly. "To lose both of them at once like that." "It was," Lucy admitted. "I had never felt so alone in my life. That is why I answered the advertisement for mail-order brides. I thought perhaps I could start over somewhere new, build a different life. I did not expect it to work out the way it did, but I am making the best of it." "You are doing more than that," Danny said. "Miss Davies told me you are wonderful with the children. She says they love you. You asked Miss Davies about me." Lucy felt her cheeks warm. "I might have made some inquiries," Danny admitted with a grin. "I wanted to know more about the mysterious woman from Boston. Miss Davies had only good things to say. So did Mrs. Patterson, though she tried to pretend otherwise. She thinks you are a hard worker and a respectable young lady." "Mrs. Patterson said that?" Lucy was genuinely surprised. "She did. She also said I better treat you right or she will take a frying pan to my head." Lucy laughed, a real laugh that made her feel lighter than she had in months. The food arrived then, and it was as good as Danny had promised. They ate and talked, and Lucy found herself telling him things she had not planned to share, like how she loved to read but could rarely afford books, and how she missed the ocean even though it had been years since she had actually seen it, and how sometimes she still felt like that scared little girl in the hayloft, falling and falling with no one to catch her. "What about you?" Lucy asked, turning the conversation. "You know all about me now. Tell me about Daniel Zimmerman." "Not much to tell," Danny said, but he obliged anyway. He had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, the youngest of 5 children. His father had died when he was 12, and his older brothers had taken over the farm while he hired himself out as a ranch hand. He had worked his way west over the years, learning everything he could about cattle and horses and the land. He had been in Colorado for 3 years now, working for different outfits, and he liked the Double R Ranch well enough that he was thinking about staying permanently. "What do you want for your future?" Lucy asked. "Do you want to work for someone else forever, or do you have other dreams?" Danny was quiet for a moment, turning his fork in his hands. "I have been saving my wages," he said finally. "Every month I put away as much as I can. Someday I want to have my own place. Nothing big, just enough land for a small herd and a house. A real house with a porch and a garden and maybe a barn. Somewhere I could put down roots, you know. Somewhere that felt like home." "That sounds wonderful," Lucy said softly. "I hope you get it. What about you? What do you want for your future?" Lucy considered the question. "Honestly, I want what I have always wanted. A home. A family. Someone to build a life with. I thought I would have that when I came here, but those men did not want what I had to offer. Maybe I was foolish to think they would." "You were not foolish," Danny said firmly. "You were brave. It takes courage to leave everything you know and travel 2,000 miles to start over. Those men were too stupid to see what was right in front of them. Their loss is my gain, though. Lucy felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and embarrassing. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are kind, because I saw how you helped that little boy who dropped his books outside the schoolhouse last week. I know you are strong, because you picked yourself up after being rejected and made a new life anyway. I know you are smart, because Miss Davies says you know more about literature than half the teachers in Colorado. And I know you are beautiful, because I have eyes in my head. He reached across the table and took her hand, his rough fingers gentle against her skin. I would like to know more if you will let me. Yes, Lucy whispered. I would like that too. They courted properly after that, following all the social conventions that Montrose society expected. Danny came to town every Sunday after church and took Lucy for walks, always staying in public view, always maintaining a respectful distance. He brought her small gifts, nothing expensive but thoughtful. A book of poetry he found at the general store, a blue ribbon for her hair, a basket he had woven himself from willow branches. Lucy learned more about him with each visit. She learned that he had a quick mind for numbers and could calculate cattle weights and feed costs in his head faster than she could do it on paper. She learned that he was kind to animals, gentle with horses even when they were being difficult. She learned that he had a temper, but kept it tightly controlled, that he would walk away from a fight rather than throw the first punch, but would not hesitate to defend someone who needed defending. She also learned that people in town were watching their courtship with great interest. The women at church whispered behind their hands, speculating about whether the rejected mail-order bride was going to snare herself a cowboy. The men at the saloon made bets on how long it would last. Gerald Morrison told anyone who would listen that he had been right to reject her, that she was clearly desperate if she was willing to settle for a common ranch hand. Vernon Hughes said nothing, but Lucy caught him watching her and Danny together one Sunday with an expression that might have been regret. Danny seemed oblivious to the gossip, or at least indifferent to it. He courted Lucy openly and proudly, never acting ashamed to be seen with her. He offered her his arm when they walked, shortening his stride to match hers without being asked. He introduced her to his friends from the ranch when they came to town, and he spoke about her with such obvious admiration that even the skeptics began to soften. 6 weeks after their first dinner, Danny asked Lucy to come out to the Double R Ranch to meet his boss, Mr. Rowland. It was a beautiful Sunday in late October, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides and the air crisp with the promise of coming winter. Danny drove her out in a borrowed wagon, and Lucy watched the landscape change from the scrubby flatlands around town to the rolling hills dotted with cattle. The ranch house was larger than she expected, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and a stone chimney. Mr. Rowland turned out to be a gruff man in his 60s with the bad knee Danny had mentioned, and a surprisingly kind smile. His wife, Sarah, was a plump, cheerful woman who immediately put Lucy at ease by asking her opinion on a quilt pattern she was working on. Over lunch, which Sarah served in a sunny dining room with lace curtains and polished silver, the Rowlands asked Lucy about her work at the schoolhouse and her life in Boston. They seemed genuinely interested in her answers, and Lucy found herself relaxing more than she had since arriving in Colorado. After the meal, Danny asked if he could show Lucy around the ranch, and the Rowlands agreed with knowing smiles. Danny took her to see the barn first, introducing her to his horse, a patient bay mare named Rosie. Then he showed her the cattle pens, the chicken coop, the equipment sheds. Finally, he led her to a small rise overlooking a creek that ran through the property, the water sparkling in the afternoon sun. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Danny said, standing beside her with his hands in his pockets. "I come here sometimes in the evenings when I need to think." "It is beautiful," Lucy said, meaning it. The view stretched for miles, mountains in the distance, golden grassland in between, the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. "Lucy," Danny said, and something in his tone made her turn to face him. He looked nervous, his hands fidgeting, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "I have been wanting to ask you something, but I want to make sure I do this right." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I know we have only been courting for 6 weeks," Danny said, the words coming faster now. "I know that is not very long, and maybe I should wait longer to make sure, but the thing is, I am sure. I have been sure since that first day when I helped you pick up your packages, and you looked at me like I was a person worth talking to instead of just some cowboy. I love you, Lucy. I love your kindness and your strength and your laugh and the way you bite your lip when you are concentrating on something. I love that you do not give up even when things are hard, and I love that you see the good in people even when they do not deserve it." Lucy could barely breathe. "Danny." "Let me finish," he said, and now he did meet her eyes, his gaze steady and sure. "I do not have much to offer you right now. I have about $300 saved up and my wages and this job, but I promise you that I will work hard every day to give you the kind of life you deserve. I will build us that house I told you about, with the porch and the garden. I will treat you with respect and kindness for the rest of my life. I will never make you feel like you are not good enough, because you are more than good enough. You are everything." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "It is not fancy," he said, "but it is real gold, and I bought it with honest money I earned. Lucy Reinhardt, will you marry me?" Lucy realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face that she made no effort to wipe away. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Danny, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper, and Lucy felt like she was finally home after being lost for so long. They married 3 weeks later, on a cold November morning with snow threatening in the gray clouds overhead. Miss Davies stood as Lucy's witness, and Pete from the ranch stood as Danny's. The ceremony was held in the small church at the edge of town, performed by the circuit preacher who only came through Montrose once a month. Lucy wore a new dress she had sewn herself, cream-colored wool with blue trim, and she carried a bouquet of dried flowers that Sarah Rowland had arranged for her. The church was not full, but there were more people than Lucy expected. The children from the schoolhouse sat in the front pews with their parents, whispering excitedly until Miss Davies shushed them. Mrs. Patterson sat in the back, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Several of the ranch hands from the Double R attended, cleaned up and wearing their Sunday best. Even Mr. and Mrs. Rowland came, which touched Lucy deeply. Notably absent were Gerald Morrison, Vernon Hughes, and Albert Fisher. Lucy did not care. She did not need them there. She had Danny, who stood at the front of the church looking nervous and handsome in a borrowed suit, his eyes lighting up when he saw her walking down the aisle. The ceremony was simple and brief. They exchanged vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Danny kissed her with such tenderness that Lucy heard several of the women in the audience sigh. After the ceremony, the Rowlands hosted a small celebration dinner at the ranch house. Sarah had prepared a feast: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, and an apple pie that made Lucy want to cry at its perfection. The ranch hands gave them gifts: A hand-carved wooden bowl, a set of tin plates, a warm quilt pieced together from scraps. Miss Davies gave them a Bible with their names inscribed on the first page. Mrs. Patterson, who had driven out to the ranch despite the cold, gave them a set of her best linen napkins and a lecture about treating each other with respect. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Mr. Rowland pulled Danny aside for a private conversation. Lucy watched them talking, their heads close together, Mr. Rowland's hand on Danny's shoulder. When they returned, both men were smiling. "Lucy," Mr. Rowland said, "I want you to know that I think Danny is one of the finest young men I have ever had the pleasure of employing. He works hard, he is honest, and he treats everyone with respect. When he told me he was planning to marry you, I knew he had found someone special." "Thank you, sir," Lucy said, touched by his words. "I have a proposition for you both," Mr. Rowland continued. "There is a line shack about 2 miles from here, on the north edge of my property. It is not much, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it is sturdy and weathertight. I use it during the spring calving season, but it sits empty most of the year. I would like to offer it to you as a home for as long as Danny works for me. No rent, just part of his wages. You can fix it up however you like, make it your own." Danny's face lit up. "Mr. Rowland, that is too generous." "Nonsense. It benefits me too. Having someone living out there year-round will help me keep an eye on that section of the ranch. And Sarah would like having another woman closer by. She gets lonely for female company out here." He smiled at Lucy. "What do you say, Mrs. Zimmerman? Would you like to see your new home?" Lucy loved the sound of that, Mrs. Zimmerman. She had a new name, a new life, a new beginning. "I would love to." They rode out to the line shack the next morning in the wagon, wrapped in blankets against the cold. The shack was small, as Mr. Rowland had said, but it was built of solid logs with a stone fireplace and a wooden floor. The 2 main rooms were a kitchen and a living area combined, and a bedroom. A ladder led to a loft under the eaves that could serve as storage or extra sleeping space someday. The windows had glass panes, which Lucy had not expected, and the door fit tightly in its frame. "It needs cleaning," Danny said, looking around with a critical eye. "And we will need furniture. But I can build most of what we need, and what I cannot build I can buy in time." "It is perfect," Lucy said, and she meant it. It was theirs, a place where they could start their life together. "When can we move in? How about right now?" They spent the next 2 weeks making the line shack into a home. Danny built a bed frame and a table and 2 chairs from lumber he bought in town. Lucy sewed curtains from fabric Mrs. Rowland gave her, and she scrubbed every surface until it gleamed. They moved in their few possessions: Lucy's trunk, Danny's saddle and gear, the wedding gifts, a few dishes and cooking utensils they bought at the general store. The first night in their new home, they made love for the first time. Danny was gentle and patient, asking if she was all right, moving slowly, making sure she felt pleasure as well as he did. Afterward, they lay together in the narrow bed they had built, Lucy's head on Danny's chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong. "Are you happy?" Danny asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I have never been happier in my life," Lucy said honestly. "I was so scared when I came to Montrose. I thought my life was over when those men rejected me. But now I see that they were doing me a favor. If any of them had married me, I would never have met you." "I was scared too," Danny admitted. "When I first saw you that day, stumbling on that loose board, I thought you were the prettiest thing I had ever seen. But I figured you would never be interested in someone like me. Just a cowboy with nothing to his name." "You are not just anything," Lucy said fiercely, raising herself up on her elbow to look at him. "You are kind and hardworking and honest. You see me, Danny, Not my limp or my past or what I cannot give you. You see me, and you love me anyway." "Not anyway," Danny corrected, pulling her down for a kiss. "I love you because of who you are, not in spite of it. Every part of you, Lucy. Every single part." Winter came to the Colorado high country with a vengeance. Snow fell in great white sheets, piling up against the walls of the line shack and covering the landscape in silence. Danny worked long hours checking on the cattle, making sure they had access to feed and water, breaking ice on the creek so the animals could drink. Lucy kept the fire burning and made hot meals for when Danny came home, cold and exhausted but always smiling when he saw her. On Christmas morning, they woke to find the world transformed. The snow had stopped overnight and the sun came out, making everything sparkle like diamonds. They had no money for elaborate gifts, but Danny had carved Lucy a beautiful wooden box with roses on the lid, and Lucy had knitted him a warm scarf from wool she had unraveled from an old shawl. "I have something else for you," Danny said after they had opened their gifts and eaten the special breakfast Lucy had made. He looked nervous again, the way he had when he proposed. "It is not really a present, but it is something I wanted you to know." "What is it?" "I have been talking to Mr. Rowland about buying some land. There is a section adjacent to his property that the owner wants to sell. It is about 80 acres with good water and grazing. Mr. Rowland said he would loan me part of the money, and I have my savings. If I can put together the down payment, I could buy it. We could have our own place, Lucy. Our own ranch, small but ours." Lucy threw her arms around him. "Danny, that is wonderful. When did you find this out?" "Last week. I did not want to say anything until I was sure it could really happen. But Mr. Rowland thinks I can do it, and the owner is willing to give me a fair price. It would take time. I would have to keep working for the Double R for a while until we get established. But it would be ours, Lucy. A real future. We should do it," Lucy said immediately. "Whatever we need to do, we should do it. I believe in you, Danny. I believe in us." They spent the rest of the winter planning and saving. Lucy took on more sewing work, staying up late by lamplight to finish shirts and dresses and mending. Danny worked extra hours when he could, taking on additional tasks around the ranch to earn extra wages. They lived frugally, spending money only on necessities, saving every penny they could spare. In February, Lucy realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she waited to be sure before telling Danny. When she finally told him one evening after supper, he stared at her in stunned silence for a long moment before sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around the small kitchen. "A baby," he kept saying, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Lucy asked, suddenly nervous. They had not planned this and they were still trying to save for the land. A baby would change everything. "Happy, Lucy, I am thrilled." "Scared out of my mind, but thrilled." He set her down gently, his hands cupping her face. "Are you happy?" "Yes," Lucy said, and it was true. She was scared too, scared of childbirth and all the things that could go wrong, scared of being a mother when she had no mother of her own to guide her. But underneath the fear was joy, pure and bright. "I am so happy, Danny." The baby was due in early October, which gave them 7 months to prepare. Sarah Rowland, when she heard the news, was overjoyed and insisted on teaching Lucy everything she knew about babies and childbirth. Miss Davies promised that Lucy could return to her job at the school after the baby was old enough to leave. Mrs. Patterson knitted tiny booties and caps and delivered them to the line shack with gruff instructions about proper prenatal care. In April, Danny and Mr. Rowland finalized the land purchase. Danny made the down payment with his savings and the loan from Mr. Rowland, and he signed the papers that made him the owner of 80 acres of Colorado rangeland. He came home that evening with the deed in his hand, tears streaming down his face. "We did it," he said, showing Lucy the paper with their names on it. "We own land, Lucy. We are landowners." Lucy cried too, holding the deed like it was made of gold. They were not rich. They were still living in the line shack, still working for the Rowlands, still scraping by on modest wages. But they had land. They had equity. They had a foundation to build on. Over the summer, Danny worked on their land whenever he had free time. He built a small barn first, big enough for a few horses and some equipment. Then he started on a house, working slowly and carefully to make sure every board was straight and every nail was driven true. It was not a large house, just 4 rooms on one floor, but it had a porch like he had promised Lucy, and windows that would let in plenty of light. Lucy helped when she could, though her growing belly made it harder to move around. She painted the window frames white, planted a garden near where the kitchen would be, and sewed curtains for the windows that did not yet have glass. She could see it taking shape, this home they were building together, and it filled her with pride. The baby came on October 3rd, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Lucy woke in the middle of the night with contractions, and Danny rode through the darkness to fetch Sarah Rowland and the midwife from town. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the following night, but finally, just after midnight, their son was born. They named him David, and he was perfect. Tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair like his father and green eyes like his mother. Danny held him with such gentleness that Lucy fell in love with her husband all over again, watching this strong cowboy cradle their infant son like he was made of glass. "He is beautiful," Danny whispered, tears running unashamedly down his face. "Lucy, he is perfect." "He is ours," Lucy said, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "Our son." They moved into the new house when David was 3 months old in January of 1884. It was not completely finished yet. The loft still needed flooring, and they were using crates for furniture in some rooms. But the walls were solid, the roof was tight, and the fireplace kept them warm against the winter cold. Lucy stood in the middle of her new kitchen, holding David against her shoulder, looking around at the space that was finally, truly theirs. The curtains she had sewn hung in the windows. The table Danny had built sat against the wall. The pantry she had insisted on had shelves that Danny had made to her specifications. Outside, through the window, she could see the barn and the small corral where Danny kept his horses. "What do you think?" Danny asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around both her and the baby. "Is it everything you hoped for?" Lucy thought about the girl who had stepped off the train in Montrose almost 18 months ago. That scared, desperate girl who had been rejected by 3 men and left standing alone on the platform with nowhere to go. She thought about how lost she had felt, how hopeless, how certain that her life was over before it had really begun. "It is more," Lucy said, leaning back against her husband's chest. "It is so much more than I ever dreamed." They built their life slowly over the next few years. Danny worked their land while still helping Mr. Rowland when needed, building up their small herd with cattle he bought cheaply at auction and raised himself. Lucy worked from home, sewing for customers in town and taking care of David, who grew into an energetic, curious toddler with his father's smile and his mother's stubbornness. In the spring of 1885, Lucy became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and their daughter, Clara, was born in December, arriving quickly in the middle of a snowstorm with only Danny there to help deliver her. Clara was tiny and fierce, with auburn hair like Lucy and brown eyes that turned green as she grew. Money was tight, but they were happy. They had enough to eat, a warm home, and each other. Danny was building a reputation as a reliable rancher, someone who kept his word and treated his animals well. Lucy was known for her beautiful sewing, and she had more work than she could handle. Sometimes Lucy would see the three men who had rejected her. Gerald Morrison was still at the bank, still pompous and self-important. His wife had left him the previous year, running off with a traveling salesman, and he had become even more bitter. Vernon Hughes had lost his ranch to debt, and now worked as a hired hand for someone else. His dreams of building an empire turned to dust. Albert Fisher's shop had burned down, and he had moved away to Denver to live with relatives. Lucy did not take pleasure in their misfortunes, but she could not help thinking about the different life she might have had if any of them had chosen her. A life of trying to live up to someone else's expectations, of always feeling like she was not quite good enough, of hiding her limp and her past and her true self. Instead, she had Danny, who loved her exactly as she was. She had David and Clara, who did not care that their mother walked with a limp. She had a home that she and Danny had built together with their own hands and their own sweat. She had a future full of possibility. In 1887, Danny bought an adjoining 40 acres, expanding their ranch. That same year, Lucy helped organize a church social that raised money for a new schoolhouse. In 1888, their third child, a son they named Matthew, was born. In 1889, Danny was elected to the town council, a position that brought respect but no pay. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. Calving in spring, haying in summer, roundup in fall, long, quiet winters huddled around the fire. David grew tall and serious, helping his father with the cattle as soon as he was old enough. Clara was wild and fearless, riding horses before she could read. Matthew was gentle and dreamy, preferring books to ranch work, which Danny supported despite the teasing from other ranchers. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Danny surprised Lucy with a trip to Denver. They left the children with Sarah Rowland and took the train to the city, staying in a real hotel for 3 nights. Danny bought Lucy a new dress from a fancy shop, and they ate dinner in a restaurant with white tablecloths and crystal glasses. They went to the theater and saw a play, Lucy's first time ever, and she cried at the beauty of it. On their last night in Denver, lying in the hotel bed with the city sounds drifting through the window, Danny took Lucy's hand. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. Coming all the way to Colorado, being rejected like that, having to start over with nothing, Lucy thought about the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "I do not regret any of it. Even the painful parts led me to you. If Gerald Morrison had married me, I would probably be miserable, trying to be someone I am not. If Vernon Hughes had chosen me, I would be worked to exhaustion on his ranch. If Albert Fisher had accepted me, I would be stuck in that little shop, ashamed of who I am. But they did not choose me, Danny. You did. And you chose me not in spite of who I am, but because of it. How could I regret anything that led me here? I am glad they were fools," Danny said, pulling her close, "because their foolishness gave me everything I ever wanted." In 1892, 10 years after Lucy first arrived in Montrose, the town decided to celebrate its 20th anniversary with a big festival. There were speeches and games and a dance in the evening. Lucy wore a beautiful dress she had made herself, dark green silk that brought out her eyes, and Danny wore a new suit that they could finally afford. At the dance, Lucy saw Gerald Morrison standing by the punch bowl, alone and bitter-looking. She thought about going over to speak to him, to show that she bore no grudge, but before she could decide, Danny pulled her onto the dance floor. They danced together, Danny leading her smoothly despite her limp, both of them laughing when they missed a step. Lucy looked around at the people watching them. Miss Davies, now a good friend who dined with them monthly, Mrs. Patterson, who had become like a grandmother to their children, the Rowlands who had given them their start, the townspeople who had witnessed Lucy's rejection and now saw her triumph. "What are you thinking about?" Danny asked, spinning her gently. "About how grateful I am," Lucy said, "for all of it, for you seeing what those other men missed, for you loving me when I felt unlovable, for building this life with me." "I am the grateful one," Danny replied. "You took a chance on a cowboy with nothing but dreams and $300. You worked beside me, believed in me, made me better than I was. Everything good in my life came from you saying yes that day by the creek. We made it together," Lucy said. "Everything we have, we built together." "Together," Danny agreed, kissing her right there in the middle of the dance floor, not caring who saw. The years continued to unfold in blessing after blessing. In 1895, their fourth child was born, another daughter they named Rose. The ranch expanded to over 200 acres, with a good-sized herd and a reputation for quality cattle. Danny hired a ranch hand to help with the work, a young man named Jack who reminded Lucy of Danny when she first met him, hardworking and honest with big dreams. David, now a teenager, showed aptitude for ranching and talked about studying animal husbandry at the new agricultural college. Clara wanted to be a teacher like Miss Davies and spent her free time helping at the schoolhouse. Matthew had his heart set on becoming a lawyer, devouring every book on law he could find. Little Rose was still too young to know what she wanted, but she loved following her father around the ranch, mimicking everything he did. In 1898, Lucy and Danny celebrated their 16th anniversary by hosting a party at their ranch. They invited everyone who had been part of their journey: the Rowlands, now elderly but still active; Miss Davies, who had married a doctor and had 2 children of her own; Mrs. Patterson, who was slowing down but still sharp as ever; the ranch hands who had worked for them over the years; the families from church; the townspeople who had become friends. Lucy looked around at the crowd gathered on their porch and spread across their yard, eating food from her kitchen and laughing in the summer sunshine. She thought about the frightened girl who had arrived in Montrose with nothing but a trunk and fading hope. She thought about standing on that train platform, watching 3 men reject her one after another, feeling like her world was ending. She had been so wrong. Her world had not been ending that day. It had been beginning. Danny came up beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. His hair was starting to gray at the temples now, and he had lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Lucy, he was as handsome as he had been the day he helped her pick up her packages on Main Street. "Happy?" he asked, the same question he had been asking her for 16 years. "Always," Lucy replied, the same answer she always gave because it was always true. Their children grew and flourished. David went to agricultural college and came home with new ideas about breeding and land management that helped the ranch prosper even more. Clara became a teacher, taking over Miss Davies's position when she retired, and married a kind young farmer from the next county. Matthew studied law and opened a practice in Montrose, becoming known for his fairness and his willingness to help those who could not afford to pay. Rose surprised them all by becoming a veterinarian, one of the first women in Colorado to do so, studying at a school in the East and coming home to serve the ranching community that had raised her. In 1905, Danny and Lucy became grandparents when Clara gave birth to a daughter. More grandchildren followed over the years, filling their home with noise and laughter during holidays and family gatherings. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party. The whole town came, and speeches were made about the contributions Danny and Lucy had made to Montrose. The mayor called them pillars of the community, examples of what hard work and dedication could achieve. But what Lucy remembered most from that day was not the speeches or the presents or the cake that Rose had baked. It was the moment late in the evening when she and Danny slipped away from the crowd and walked out to the creek, the same creek where he had proposed all those years ago. They stood together in the fading light, watching the water sparkle and listening to the sounds of celebration drifting from the house. 25 years, Danny said, shaking his head in wonder. Where did the time go? Into building a life, Lucy replied, taking his hand. Into raising children and building a ranch and becoming part of something bigger than ourselves. Do you remember what I told you that day I proposed, about wanting a house with a porch and a garden? I remember. I got so much more than that. I got you, Lucy. I got our children and our grandchildren and this whole beautiful life. All because I helped you pick up some packages one day. All because you saw me, Lucy corrected. When everyone else looked at me and saw only what was wrong, you looked at me and saw what was right. You saw who I really was and you loved her. I still do, Danny said, pulling her close. I still see you and I still love what I see, more every day. They stood there as the sun set, two people who had built a life together from nothing but hope and hard work and love. The rejected mail-order bride, and the cowboy who saw what others missed, standing on their own land, surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor, still as in love as they had been on that first day. Years later, when Lucy was old and her hair was white, and Danny walked with a cane from an old injury, they would sit on their porch in the evening and watch the sunset paint the mountains gold. Their children would visit with their grandchildren, and great-grandchildren would play in the yard where Lucy had once planted her first garden. And Lucy would think about that train platform in 1882, about the three men who had rejected her, about how devastated she had felt. She would think about how she had believed her life was over, that she had traveled all that way for nothing. She had been so spectacularly wrong. Those rejections had not been the end of her story. They had been the beginning. They had led her to Danny, to this life, to a love deeper and truer than she had ever imagined possible. The mail-order bride who was rejected by three men had found something those men would never understand. A partner who saw past surface imperfections to the person underneath, who valued character over appearance, who chose love over convenience. Danny Zimmerman had seen what those three men missed. A woman of courage and strength, of kindness and intelligence, of loyalty and grace. He had chosen her, married her, and built a life with her that exceeded either of their dreams. And Lucy Zimmerman, formerly Lucy Reinhardt of Boston, the girl with the limp who traveled 2,000 miles to be rejected, had found her home at last. Not in the arms of the men who rejected her, but with the cowboy who saw her true worth and claimed it for his own. Their love story became part of Montrose history, told and retold over the years. The rejected mail-order bride who built a ranching empire with her devoted husband. The cowboy who saw past a physical imperfection to the treasure underneath. The couple who proved that the best love stories often begin with rejection and end in triumph. They lived long, happy lives, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them proof that the love between Danny and Lucy was real and lasting and true. And when they finally passed, within months of each other as couples who are deeply in love sometimes do, they left behind a legacy of hard work, dedication, and most of all, love that saw past surface imperfections to the beauty underneath. Their great-grandson would eventually write their story down, interviewing family members and reading old letters to piece together the tale of how his great-grandparents met and fell in love. He would tell it to his own children, and they would tell it to theirs, passing down through generations the story of the mail-order bride who was rejected by 3 men and the cowboy who saw what they missed. Because in the end, Lucy and Danny's story was not about rejection. It was about recognition, about one person seeing another clearly and choosing to love what they saw, about building something beautiful out of what others had discarded, about proving that true worth is not measured by physical perfection, but by the content of one's character. And it was about love, the kind of love that lasts a lifetime, the kind that weathers storms and celebrates triumphs, the kind that grows deeper with each passing year, the kind that builds homes and raises families and creates legacies. The kind of love that began on a dusty street in Montrose, Colorado, in 1882, when a cowboy helped a limping woman pick up her scattered packages and saw not her imperfection but her possibility, not her past but her potential, not what was wrong with her but what was beautifully, perfectly right. That was the love story of Danny and Lucy Zimmerman, and it was one worth telling, one worth remembering, one that proved, beyond any doubt, that the best things in life often come from what initially seems like failure. That rejection by the wrong people is sometimes the universe's way of leading you to the right person. And that true love, when it finds you, sees you for exactly who you are and loves you not in spite of it, but because of it. Their house still stands on that land in Colorado, over a century later, maintained by descendants who remember the story of how it came to be. Visitors can see the porch Danny built, the kitchen where Lucy cooked countless meals, the bedroom where their children were born. They can stand by the creek where Danny proposed and look at the view that has changed remarkably little in all these years. And if they are quiet and listen carefully, some say they can almost hear it. The echo of laughter, the sound of children playing, the murmur of 2 voices speaking softly to each other in the twilight. The ghosts of a great love story, still present in the home they built together. Because love like that does not really end. It continues, rippling forward through time in the lives of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the land that was tended with care, in the community that was built with dedication, in the story that gets told and retold, inspiring new generations to look past surface imperfections and see the beauty underneath. Danny and Lucy Zimmerman lived a great love story, one that began with rejection and ended in triumph, that started with nothing and built everything, that proved beyond doubt that the best loves are the ones that see us clearly and love us truly. And that is the story worth remembering. Not the rejection, but the recognition. Not the ending, but the beautiful beginning. Not the 3 men who said no, but the one man who said yes and meant it with his whole heart. That is the story of the mail-order bride and the cowboy who saw what others missed, who chose love when others chose prejudice, who built a legacy that still stands today as proof that true love, when it finds you, changes everything.